Here's today's First Word Daily Devotion.
On June the 2nd, as we turn to our Old Testament reading, we're still dealing with the consequence of sin, and that idea is going to be before us, especially as it relates to what we see, especially from the mountaintop experience of the Pentateuch, where God dealt specifically with His people in a way that is unparamount or unprecedented, or a way that He hasn't done before, a way that He will do again. But He was with them, leading them by the cloud, guiding Moses. There's not been another one like Moses. And so here we have everything sort of unraveling after Deuteronomy chapter 30, where Moses lays out blessings and curses. And so keep that in mind. Remember where we are in our narrative, in our reading, and remember everything. God's telling a story that's all going to culminate in Jesus Christ. And remember how we're reading the Bible. It's not just a progressive unfolding. We're not simply doing that as if it's just one line of story. We're reading the Bible as a whole. And so as we encounter the pages of Samuel, we always have in our heart and mind Jesus Christ, because of course this Jesus has united the end from the beginning. But let's turn to June 2nd, 2 Samuel chapter 20 and 21. I want to point out something to you in 2 Samuel 21 and verse 1. I want you to see this. Now there was a famine in the days of David for 3 years, year after year, and David sought the face of the Lord. Now that's important. Remember, David is an old man here, and still, even as he is aging, he has the principles that have brought him success. He has the principles that have satisfied his life, the principle of this God who is always near. And even in his old age, he remembers the Lord. And look at the next verse here, or the next sentence. And the Lord said. And so God answers David even when he's old. And you need to remember this today. If you're young, you have the anticipation of having a long relationship with Jesus Christ. And that's the beauty of the Song of Ascents as we get there in our psalm reading. But if you're old, you have the assurance that God still answers and hears. You see, here's what we know. We age, we grow old, we change, but our God never changes. And so we have what the Lord said here, and this is direct reference. Remember, there is still consequence of sin. The sin of Saul still lingers, and so there has to be atonement. And look at verse 7. The sons of Saul are hanged to make atonement. Now, there again, we remember Jesus. Remember our reading. It's not as if the Jesus hasn't come and happened, as if Jesus isn't. Jesus is. He's right now seated at the right hand of the Father. And it's through the Spirit of Christ that we read the words of God. And so we have to read this, and our minds have to be lifted up to think this is the reason that Jesus was hanged on a tree for us, to make atonement for our past, present, and future sins. But let's turn over to Acts chapter 8, and let's look at this. Here we have this beautiful instance of the Ethiopian eunuch, and the Ethiopian eunuch returning seated on his chariot, and he was reading the prophet Isaiah. The Spirit said to Philip, "Go over and join the chariot." And then look at this passage he was reading. Like a sheep he was led to the slaughter, like a lamb before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. In his humiliation justice was denied him. Who can describe his generation? For this life is taken away from the earth. And the eunuch said to Philip, "About whom, I ask you, does the prophet say this, about himself or about someone else?" And Philip opened his mouth. And look at this. Beginning with the scripture, he told him the good news about Jesus. And so here's how Philip decided to tell the story of Jesus. Philip didn't say, well, let me tell you about my experience. No. He had something much richer than his own experience. He had something to anchor his experience, and that anchoring of his experience was the holy word of Scripture. And regardless, remember, of the Spirit taking him here, the Spirit doing this thing to bring him to this eunuch who is providentially in the way. Well, he didn't begin with that story. Man, let me tell you how I got here. No, instead, he opened his mouth, and beginning with the Scripture, he told him the good news of Jesus Christ. And remember this is important when we're reading the Bible. We're not reading the Bible to get a history lesson. We're reading the Bible to know God. And the only way to know God is through Jesus Christ. And the only way to know Jesus Christ is through Holy Scripture. Look at verse 40. Philip found himself at Azotus, And as he passed through, he preached the gospel to the towns until he came to Caesarea. Now let's look at Psalm 121. I lift my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. Now look at verse 7 and think specifically about David and his old age. The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forevermore. And this is the confidence that we have every day, no matter how many days you have ahead of you or how many days you have behind you. You have the confidence that the Lord will keep you. You're going out, you're coming in from this time forth and forevermore.